Begin recording. I think it's recording. Can y'all see that?
It is.
Well, I'm going to mute and then we can get started.
Thank you, Caitlin. Yeah, so welcome everyone to our first workshop of the semester. Before we dive into what's written on your slides, we just wanted to offer a little gentle reminder of the live transcript at the bottom of the screen. So if you need that, don't be afraid to just go ahead and click it and it'll immediately pop up for you. Okay, so the first thing that we wanted to do this evening was just a little bit of interactive fun. So using your Zoom reactions that you can find at the bottom right, how do you feel about your current writing style and why? So the kind of like shocked face is like, girl, what's a voice? Huh? I don't even know what that is. What are you talking about? The heart is like, okay, it needs a little bit of work. I don't necessarily sound like myself when I write. And then the kind of confetti emoji is like, I'm in my bag. It's on period. I know my style well, and it accurately reflects my academic voice. So go ahead using one of those three functions and let us know how you feel about your current writing style. Tutors, you can participate too.
Okay, these new little reactions are like so cute to me.
Okay, so I'm seeing some in my bag. I'm seeing some need some work, and we're gonna work on it tonight. Okay, come on, in my bag. Need some work. Okay, so it seems like we're got it. Okay, so we're in the middle and okay, I got it. All right. All right, so this is great. One of the reasons as to why we wanted to do this one was just to, start off a little bit in a fun way, but also to really get a sense of where we are at, so then we know how best to help you throughout the workshop. So thank you so much for coming tonight. And then we have one other question, and you can type your responses in the chat. Feel free to kind of like do bullet points if you don't want to write out a whole long sentence or a paragraph. But what differences have you observed in high school versus college level writing? I know many of us have experienced it in high school was very much 5 paragraphs, that's it, versus college level is like papers, pages, So that's an example, but let us know what differences you've seen between high school, college level writing.
Can we put some responses in the chat too?
Oh yeah, of course. You can put some responses in the chat, fellow tutors. Please go ahead. No, yeah. Okay, so Chan responded feeling a little bit less limited in college writing than in high school. Same. Definitely much more freedom, I think, as well. How are others feeling? Or at least what differences have you seen? Yep. Absolutely. So main differences in length, yes. More than MLA, absolutely. I think only in high school they were just like MLA, MLA, and then I got to college and I was like, what other things exist? And then of course, yes, the need for more analysis, definitely much more structure, just get it on the page in high school. Forced to write succinctly, yep, to really expand my thoughts in college, yes, across a lot of pages. Seconding, okay, I had to learn to be crisp and to the core. Able to express myself more in college level writing. So it seems like from what I'm getting, people feel like you have a little bit more space to write in college, which is absolutely true. Professors I keep calling them professors, teachers in high school tend to have like, this is the prompt and stick to the prompt versus I'm sure many of us in college, they ain't no prompt. The professor's like, here are some sentences I kind of threw together. And then you kind of figure it out on your own, which is part of the fun of college writing. So thank you so much for answering that. And we will be sure to keep these answers in mind as we move forward with the workshop. I think Katie had something to say.
Actually, no, y'all can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Great. All right. So then we're going to kick it off with Alicia.
Yeah, thanks. So with the first part of reviewing the prompt, this becomes the first step and idea about developing your academic voice, because you need to know what you're writing about. This is where the professor is allowing you to have the framework and idea and guide for the assignment that they have for you. So one thing to keep in mind is to always revisit your prompt throughout the writing process. This is not something you just want to read once and be done with it. This is something you always want to refer back to. So For things that you are actually looking for within the prompt and making sure you have a full understanding on what you need to write, you need to look at key phrases. These key phrases are action verbs that are in the prompt. These action verbs can be things such as compare and contrast. It might be reflect, justify, or explain. You're looking at these specific words because they kind of help you see what you need to do. There's quite a difference in comparing to class materials or writings versus reflecting on your personal thoughts. So once you have that direction, you could really learn how to expand in the type of paper you're working on, or even presentation. Then you want to look at style. MLA, APA, Chicago, this is usually mentioned in the prompt, and it's something that you could focus on because it also helps you realize from the beginning of how are you citing things, how are you formatting the actual pages of your paper, so you could do it throughout the process. So it's something you could do while you're researching. It's not something you come back to the very end. It's something that you could start very early on. The prompt also indicates what sources are needed. Usually it tells you how many sources, it tells you primary or secondary sources, it tells you, do the professor wants academic journals or regular articles are allowed. This also helps you indicate, how much information you need to put in. It helps you realize the type of seriousness it could be if it's an academic journal, and it helps you indicate the tone that the professor is looking for here. And then you want to look at the due date. The due date helps you also with saying the tone, or maybe understanding how you should plan to revise and edit your paper. So if you have a due date that's 1 week away, professors are not necessarily expecting a full out revised, edited paper. But if it's due at the end of the semester, they want you to put time in it. They want you to go to the CWS, look at resources. They want you to be able to have meetings with them. And these are things that can indicate how you plan and go on for your paper. And lastly, looking at the rubric. Sometimes the rubric is part of the prompt. Sometimes the rubric is the prompt. Sometimes the rubric is completely separate. But it's something to keep in mind, because that rubric, the very column that said, this is a 5 paper and this is going to give you your full amount of points, it will give you clear direction on what the professor is looking for. It will say, you're going to exceed my expectations if you include 5 sources versus including 1 source. So being mindful of that from the very beginning and looking at your prompts and having a full under your prompt is really key.
Thank you, Felicia, for those great tips on what to look for in our assignment prompts. So as Felicia said, before we begin writing, reviewing prompts allows us to identify what the professor is asking of us, what we should include in our writing assignments, and what format to present our work in. Another step in the preparing to write process after reviewing your prompt is reviewing class content and materials. So after you have identified what your professor is looking for in an assignment, it's now time for you to begin developing your topic. And when you think about developing your topic, questions like, what do I want to focus on? Or, what do I want to write about tend to pop up. And to answer these questions, I think in the past, many of us, including a younger Leah, would immediately dive into like Google Scholar, EBSCOhost, WorldCat, and like a bunch of other databases. And while I think we both had really good intentions, I remember quickly becoming overwhelmed at how much content existed in each of these databases. And I'm sure many of my fellow tutors, as well as my students here tonight, remember feeling the exact same way. And unfortunately, feelings of being overwhelmed then tend to make us not want to write anymore, which is the exact opposite of what we need to be doing when there's an upcoming assignment deadline. So what can we do to try then and limit that feeling of being overwhelmed? In short, what you can do is notice what you notice. So in other words, as you read for class and participate in class discussions, identify what interests you, upsets you, angers you, excites you. You know, the list can go on, but essentially having such strong emotions and such strong emotional reactions to a text or a comment that came up in class discussion can then later help spark a topic idea for your assignment. And then once you found that topic, then you make sure to go back, review the prompt, and utilize your class notes and other materials and resources to then continue developing that idea, right? Because we don't just want to necessarily write an entire essay based on emotion, but also based on evidence. And I actually recall using this exact same process in my sophomore year during my upper level theory class for my international relations major. After reviewing the assigned prompt, I was very much overwhelmed because we had learned so much in that class and I had no idea kind of which theory or which topic I wanted to focus on. But then I noticed what I noticed, right? I remembered how much I enjoyed learning about and discussing green theory. And this pushed me to write my final paper in the class on like green theory, climate change, and forced migration, right? For me, writing on something that I enjoyed made the entire writing process, which can be extremely long, much more bearable. So as you think about what you want to focus on, be sure to think about what excites you or interests you. And this is a really, really good beginning writing habit. And then next slide, Amaris, thank you. And then if I haven't given you enough reasons to notice what you notice and review class materials, another reason would be that noticing what you notice and reviewing class materials can also be a great way for you to develop your own academic voice. So as you read through textbooks and assign articles for class, think about what you like, right, and don't like about an author's tone or their writing style or their writing techniques. Do you think they conveyed the text's information in a clear manner? Did they use unnecessarily large jargon and words that made it difficult for you to kind of understand that text? Answering these types of questions can help you identify what style, tone, and writing techniques you want to include in your own writing. And then also, of course, answering these questions can help ensure that you don't later copy the style or plagiarize the work of another author. So developing your own academic voice, right, is great for you because then you begin to sound like you in your own writing. I specifically remember that same exact IR class. My discipline is quite known for utilizing clunky jargon that make it very difficult for people to understand like any of our scholarly texts, people including myself, I'm talking about me. But reading and reviewing these texts sparked a desire in me to develop an academic voice that was accessible for all, including those outside of my own discipline. So think about what kind of writing you want to produce, right? Reviewing these texts helped me develop my own academic voice. And I think if you review your text for your own classes, the same will happen for you. And next slide, Amaris, thank you. So as a recap, when you prepare to write, notice what you notice, right? Review class materials, class textbooks, your notes, right? Think back to what excited you, upset you, interested you as you participated in class. Don't forget to take notes as well, because your notes can also be a great starting point. We as tutors have heard many stories of students saying like, oh, I'm just gonna go back and watch the Zoom video later. You know you don't be watching that Zoom video. Don't even lie to yourself. Just go ahead, take the notes right now. Take them right now. And while you take those notes, you can jot down key themes, ideas, and comments that interest you. And then later you can revisit those notes to find a topic for an assignment. And then of course, to also help you develop your own academic voice. So now I'm going to hand this workshop over to Jasana to chat more with you about another step in the preparing to write process, which is brainstorming.
Great, thanks, Leah. That was awesome because reviewing class material is super, super important and it helps with brainstorming. I'm just going to talk about a few ways to brainstorm. There are a bunch, but the first one I'm going to talk about is talking it out. You can do this with a friend, with your mom. I know I drag my mom into almost all of my assignments and she don't care, but I still talk about it. You can talk with your siblings, really whoever's there, a CWS tutor. But it's really helpful because if you're talking out loud, you're hearing your own thoughts. So you might strike up a new idea, Or having someone listen to you, they can act as a sounding board and help you kind of just expand those ideas that you already have. Another way to brainstorm is free writing. And I really love this one because you set a timer for 10 minutes and then you just write without worrying about judgment or grammar or having these big complete thoughts. And you just sit there and you go with it. And then afterwards you review your writing, you look through, you sift, and you can pull out these ideas that you have. Maybe you have some really great phrases, maybe you have full sentences, and you can use those in your writing or to branch off and build new ideas. Another one, which is a personal favorite of mine, is mind mapping. I really love mind mapping because I'm a visual learner. So if you're a visual learner, this is great. What you do is you basically start with one idea and then you build off from that. You connect some of the ideas that you have, and you don't always have to write. You can use charts, you can have a web. If you like to sketch, you can make little sketches. And then when you're connecting those ideas, you might learn something that you didn't even realize before. You might have these two ideas that you didn't think connected, and then they do, and that might be something worth exploring. And lastly, finding secondary and primary sources is hugely important because it shows you what is already out there. So it helps you narrow your scope and create an original and unique idea, which is really great with research projects, by the way, original ideas. So I know I went through that kind of fast, but the idea is brainstorming is really, really helpful. And it's not just something that you have to do in the beginning of the writing process. You can be mid-writing and realize you need more content. You want to flesh out some ideas. It is okay to revisit those. Brainstorming is a completely unique experience, so you don't have to do any of these. You can combine some of these and do a bunch of them. And if you're not sure where to start, come to the CWS tutor. You can talk to a librarian. You can talk to your professor. There are bunches of ways to do this, and sometimes they're fun. So I hope that this was helpful, and I'm going to pass it along to Amaris, who's going to share some resources for research.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, Jasana. Well, let me just say, if you haven't found out already, you will find out that as students at Agnes, in most cases, we will be required to integrate some sort of outside research into our assignments. So a professor may ask you to put some outside research in conversation with the topic you all have been discussing in class, or you might just have to write a personal research paper, which I'm sure a lot of our seniors in here are very familiar with at this point. So the first point of research in the preparing to write process is preliminary research that Jasana touched on a bit earlier. So at this point, you may not have a solidified idea about what you want to write about. You may be just searching the web to, figure out what's out there, what can you write about, or you may have an idea about what you want to write about, but just kind of saying, what are some of the conversations surrounding your topic, right? At this point, a general Google search is appropriate. Finding websites on Google, that is appropriate. However, as we know, everything on Google is not credible, so be sure to check those website publication dates. And you may also want to triple check your information by comparing what you find on one website to some others that you might find. So some people that you can kind of talk to in this stage of your research process: Chris Bishop and Casey Long are wonderful research assistants in McCain Library, and they are more than happy to help at any stage of the research process. Again, you can kind of just have a basic conversation to kind of get those wheels spinning and get a better idea of what you actually want to do. And also feel free to meet with the CWS tutor for just a second opinion. If you are at a point where you do have a better idea about what you want to write about, it may be a good idea to just go ahead and start looking at those more credible sources, again, to see the academic discourse surrounding what you want to do, and then even start thinking about how you enter that academic conversation. Again, just the brainstorming part of research, still getting those wheels spinning and seeing what's out there, okay? The second point of research is the in-depth stage. So at this point in your research process, you have a pretty solidified idea about what you actually want to write about. You're kind of filling the gaps in your own knowledge, considering perspectives that you didn't consider before. And again, seeing what the academic discourse is surrounding your topic. At this point, those websites that we're finding on Google are not sufficient for college level writing. When it comes down to citing things in our writing, we want to go ahead and make use of those more credible sources such as databases, academic journals, and those published studies as well. Again, because we do have a responsibility to be credible to our audience when we are writing. Who to talk to? Appointments with Chris and Casey are crucial at this point. I really encourage you all to make an appointment at more than one point in your writing process. Those conversations with Chris and Casey are definitely going to help you kind of sort through the information that you actually need to cite in your paper and maybe put the things to the side that are not of much use to you at that point. Also, those conversations can help you really find sources that are reflective of your identity and your background. We're going to get into the conversation of academic voice later. However, part of that is making sure who you are, your interests, and your background, that stuff is coming out in your writing. So when you have the opportunity to do so, when your assignment guidelines leave you the room to do so, please take advantage of, finding sources that are reflective of who you are and what you're interested in, okay? And again, I just want to stress, Chris and Casey, please, please, please make appointments with them. In the CWS, we are more than willing to help you, but they are research experts, so please make use of them. And next, I think I'm going to pass it over to Aaron, or Ren, excuse me.
Felicia.
Actually,
yeah, Felicia, you take it away.
Sorry, that's me, my bad.
No, you're good. So for outline, I'm showing you an example, but the first thing I want to say is the outline is about organization. You've done reviewing the prompts, you've brainstormed, you've collected class materials, you've done research, and now you need to put these concepts and ideas together in a way that could be clear when you start writing. So outlines show up in full text form, or it could show up in shorthand. When you have a full text outline, it's really helpful to have a complete thought sometimes, and that complete thought can happen in this basically outline where you have the introduction, sentence, a thesis statement, evidence, and write out a full sentence. But the shorthand helps when you can have more of an open idea and more hands off, so you're not kind of pigeonholing yourself to one idea. So this example is a shorthand example, and it's not exactly completed, but it was provided by a fellow tutor, Melody Simmons, who was looking at Beloved. So you have the introduction and you put a thesis, and this is a working thesis, matter of fact. And for your evidence for this, it's not necessarily saying paragraph 1 or paragraph 2. And that's also to show that we don't have to stick to a 5-paragraph essay format. This is something that can be open. So you're having an evidence idea, and then you have that topic sentence for evidence, and maybe you want to put in a quote in or two, and those can be things that you have an idea of firsthand before you start writing. And those are the major key points here about outlining.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what an academic voice even is and how you get to the point where you feel really comfortable and confident in your academic voice and ways that you can signal that to your reader. So basically, your academic voice is just the combination of position, perspective, and phrasing that is going to characterize your writing, and that should be recognizable to your reader. So your position is really just your opinion on your topic, and that's expressed in your thesis, and that's going to be your own. But it's informed by your perspective, which is your preconceptions and experiences that you bring to the table. And that's going to influence the evidence that you gather and how you organize that evidence and what you consider important to supporting your thesis or analyzing the topic at hand. And your phrasing is going to be things like word choice and sentence structure. Often when people get to college or have to write for a major assignment or an important application, they feel like they have to make their writing sound more academic, which usually involves using bigger words or more complex sentences. Lucky for you, however, the way that you write got you to where you are now already. So you're already a strong writer. And just like you already have vocabulary that you feel comfortable using or that you love to use, you already have a strong, clear academic voice developing. So don't stress out about trying to use academic jargon. Just make sure you're using clear, direct language that makes sense to you. So the trick to making So basically when you're doing that, you want to start with developing your stance, paraphrasing evidence instead of quoting directly. And you're going to write from within, which kind of goes back to noticing what you notice and using how you are, like what you already have, which already got you to this point as your starting point, rather than trying to draw on language or positions that you don't resonate with. That's it. I think Amaris is going to take us to the next section.
All right, thank you, Ren. Ren did a very good job at kind of stressing the idea that, you know, we already have a sense of academic writing, but the important thing is just remaining genuine to who we are, genuine to the words and phrases that we and our audience are ultimately familiar with. So in terms of finding your academic voice, something that's very important is word choice and also the way we kind of phrase things, obviously. So I have two examples here, one focusing on wordy versus more concise sentences, and the other focusing on choosing the right word that actually gets us to what we actually need to say to our audience. So the first example in terms of clunky versus concise sentences, the original version here is, I came to the realization that Kierkegaard is the best philosopher amongst other 19th century thinkers. So at first glance, this sentence makes sense to me. There's a comparison between one philosopher, Kierkegaard, and other 19th century philosophers. But there is a much more simpler way to say this. And what you will find is less is more in these situations, especially where, we are coming up against a word count or, we're just trying to succinctly say what we need to say. So the corrected version here would be, I realized that Kierkegaard is an unrivaled 19th century philosopher. I came to the realization that, and I realized that is actually the same thing. It's just said in, less words. Kierkegaard is an unrivaled 19th century philosopher. If you look in the first one, you see that we kind of have this comparison set up between Kierkegaard and other 19th century thinkers, right? We actually say Kierkegaard is the best philosopher amongst other 19th century thinkers. However, we can say that with less words by saying he is an unrivaled 19th century philosopher. There it can be implied that, okay, we're already talking about philosophers and, we're talking about Kierkegaard and we're talking about this comparison, right? He's unrivaled, no one touches him. And, we still got the message that we needed to get out in shorter and a more concise sentence. Okay. The next example we have here is focusing on choosing the right word, right? So in the first example, the original version, Marcia is the exclusive candidate for the 2021 Fulbright Scholarship. I don't know who Marcia is. This is a made up sentence. I don't know if she got the Fulbright or not, okay? And then in our corrected version, we have Marcia is the chosen candidate for the 2021 Fulbright Scholarship. We do know what exclusive means, right? It means like, okay, this is the individual person who was chosen. However, we might have questions about, okay, did Marcia actually receive the scholarship? Is she a finalist? Like what exactly happened here? In the second sentence, we clearly get it. Marcia is the chosen candidate for the 2021 Fulbright Scholarship. We know what happened to Marcia. We know how it ended for her. And there's not all this room for interpretation about what actually happened, okay? So when in doubt, I have this little thing up in the right corner there. Concise is academic. That is the way, we have these stigmas about sounding academic, sounding smart. At the end of the day, concise is academic. It shows that you're credible and that you know what you're talking about. So keep that in mind going forward. And I'm going to pass it to Caitlin.
Okay, just before I move on, I really love the way that you were talking about those things. And I just wanted to remind everyone that when you are writing, you're the ones that are making these calls, right? So you want to communicate your intended message as best you can. A lot of times I like to describe American, like college conventional writing, as we do all of the work up front for the reader. There are other writing styles that are not like that. And so when we're talking about adapting to this particular level of writing in this social political context, right? We're doing the work on top of that for the reader. And so another thing to keep in mind when we're talking about finding our academic voice is proofreading and those sentence level red flags. Now, this is grammar that scares a lot of people, but I just have 5 like common errors that people make. And I say errors very lightly. The reason why we have an emphasis on grammar is not because there's like a super right way to do things or a super wrong way to do things, and either you make it or you don't. A lot of times that's the message that's conveyed in high school, but that's not really the case. A lot of times just having the sentence level things in some kind of standardized forms helps to unify the things that are being said in academic discourse. So you don't want to distract the reader from what you are trying to say because you have all of these sentence level red flags. So when your professors are reading this, they do put an emphasis. A lot of them add grammar into their prompts because they're like, listen, I can't focus on what you're trying to say if all of these little red flags are popping up. So quickly, I'll just kind of go through 5 key things. The first one is vague pronoun references. Just a quick reminder, a pronoun is another word that we use for a noun, like which, that, this, they, it. If more than one word could be the antecedent or what that pronoun is referring to, or if that antecedent is not present, you want to make sure that your meaning is clear. I generally advise students to stay away from using the word it because you can replace it with the actual thing that you're talking about. The second thing is inconsistent verb tensing. You want to make sure that you stay consistent. If you're talking in the present tense, you want to keep those verbs in the present tense so that the logical flow of action is very clear for your reader. The third thing, wow, my numbers are, wow, I promise y'all I can count. I just realized that my numbers were out of order. Sorry. The third thing is spelling errors. Spell check is super important. Listen, if you like Grammarly, go for that. But sometimes they do miss things like homonyms, which are words that sound the same, but they mean different things and they're spelled differently. Sometimes they'll miss those. They'll miss common or compound words that are spelled as separate words like everywhere or every day. If you put them together, like they won't catch those things. Or proper nouns or names. So you always want to go through yourself or have a CWS tutor or someone, a friend, check your work to make sure that you don't have any of those spelling errors. The next thing is sentence fragmentation. A sentence fragment is a part of a sentence that is presented as if it were a complete sentence. A lot of times we see this with improper verb forms. So instead of saying, I don't know, the sunflower was blossoming, they would say sunflower blossoming, where blossoming is a gerund and not an action verb. So the sunflower, anyway, we can get into grammar at another time, but just be careful to make sure that your sentences have a subject, a verb, and either a direct object or something that makes the rest of the sentence contextually make sense. The last thing is poorly integrated quotations. As we surveyed all of the faculty at Agnes Scott College, this is probably their #1 pet peeve. You want your quotations to be logically and smoothly integrated with the writing that's around it. And this is super important. So I'm going to go to the next slide and talk a little bit more about that. When we're talking about integrating quotes, there are definitely many different ways that you can integrate quotes, but this is where we tend to see a lot of issues with integrating quotes into our writing. As a rule of thumb, for every one line in a quote, you want to have 2 sentences of analysis. You want to introduce whatever quote that you're about to introduce to your reader, give the quote, and then explain why it's relevant. Okay, so you never want to just put a quote out there and not kind of explain what's happening. And the thing about quotes, they're good to use because sometimes people explain things really well, but you don't want to quote too much, and you want to make sure that your quotes are relevant to your writing because you don't want someone else to speak for you. So that's why we took a moment to kind of talk about why we integrate quotes the way that we do. And I have an example on the next slide to just show you how that's done. So this is an excerpt from a class that I had in the spring of 2020. Anyway, we'll just go through it here. It says, however, Killing Ray takes on a tone and perpetuates the racist assumption of African backwardness and inferiority. For example, when describing the payment of regular wages, Killing Ray states, regular wages were new to many recruits who did not come from a society having a formal money economy, end quote. While this statement may hold some truth, it concurrently implies that pre-colonial economic forms were backward and ineffective, not acknowledging how colonialism has created a life that deprived many Africans of the opportunity to participate in the reformed economy. So as you can see there's an introductory sentence, which looks a little wonky because this is an excerpt, like taking out of something that was much larger. But there's also a signal phrase there where we're saying, this author states, and then we give the quote. After that, we have another sentence to explain why this is relevant and why it is important. Not a very super, succinct example, as Amaris was talking about earlier, but this is something that I took from one of my reflections, and I am a history person, and we tend to have very elaborate sentences. So just watch out for that. Awesome. Okay, so now we're just going to take a moment and answer any questions that you have. I know there's a lot that we gave in the workshop, so feel free to use the chat or go to your reactions and raise your hand and unmute yourself if you have any questions. If you don't have any questions, you can write that in the chat too. That would be really helpful.
If none of the other folks have any questions, I'd love to hear from the other tutors what sort of approach, I guess, y'all use to take notes in order to kind of make that material, that going back over the material process that I think it was it Felicia who talked about? Leah, I think you talked about that. Yeah, because that's often, I'm always like, what do I write down? What am I gonna, what's gonna be most important when I'm thinking about writing a paper? Because in the moment it's all interesting, or I think it's all important, and then I'm like, well, okay, maybe that wasn't all important. So what are y'all's approaches? What are y'all's techniques?
I was asking myself that question today as I was taking notes, because I find that I write more notes than I should be. And every time I lift up one of these little books at the end of the semester, and I look at this little silly book and I say, you knew you were not supposed to take that many notes. And so I've been really working on that. Literally, I've been asking my question that. So thank you, Ren. For me, what's most important is what's going to pop up in class and discussion. That for me is like a really good tip for like, what's then the professor, like I'm thinking, okay, what is the professor going to ask a question on in class? That's probably going to be the most important. And that actually happened in my transatlantic voodoo class today. I was reading the text last night and I said, it's big text. I got to figure out what most am I going to like, focus on in my notes. And I said, okay, well, I know this professor, I know like kind of what are the common misconceptions of voodoo. All right, I don't need to necessarily write that down. I have it in my notes already, but what might spark conversation in class tomorrow? Let me make sure I'm prepped for that conversation by taking these notes. And then I think that coupled alongside just in general, what interests me in the text, something I specifically remember yesterday writing down, that'll make no sense. I don't know why the author would say that, page 21, and then brought it up in class today. So I think it's a mixture of what's going to be class discussion and also what just in general excites me, upsets me, interests me, and combined, that's how I take my notes. But I'm not sure if anybody else does things a little bit more differently.
Yeah, Leah, that's so good. I always make sure to identify what the author's argument is. And I make sure that I write it down and I write the places that I find that. I almost take like a reverse outline approach to that, just highlighting the argument and then noting what are those big things that they do to support the argument, in addition to all the things that Leah said. So I take a lot of notes. But one reason that I really like to do that is because it's kind of a personal pet peeve of mine, is when we take sections or things in the text out of the context of the argument, right? Everything when we're writing, everything that we say should be in support of one or two central ideas. And that is how the author is trying to convey a point, or trying to convey multiple points to support one big idea. So I always make it a point to write down what the arguments are, how are they supporting their argument, what are some interesting things that I think they are, what are some things that are going to come up in class discussion, so that I have that context there. Then that's super helpful for when you're going back and thinking about pulling different class materials for a research project. You can kind of, if you have those things already written down, you can include that in your literature review. Like, you don't have to do the extra rereading to go back and figure out what their arguments and things were. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can mention my process a little bit. Very similar to what Leah and Caitlin have mentioned already. I just wanted to say a little bit about us taking notes in class. So I don't know about y'all, but I would be in class, especially those that are like lecture style, and I would write down everything the professor said. That is just not efficient at this point in our career, and we have to switch gears. So what I would advise you to do, if you are someone who takes notes as they're reading, right, you might take notes in one color. Then when you get to class, the professor might mention some of those very important things that you saw. Either, if you don't have it in your notes already, write it in another color in the margins, or highlight it. Don't sit there and write what you already did for 2 hours the night before. Go ahead and save yourself some time, and try to see where you can fill in the gaps in the conversation that you all are having in class.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, these are all great points. I do a little bit of everything people have mentioned already. I would add, I definitely, depending for like what I'm studying, so I'm business management and Africana studies, like back and forth, but one thing that remains true is I focus on definitions a lot, vocab. So jotting down terms. If a professor mentions a term I don't know, I need to write down that word. Even if I don't get the exact definition they give, I have the word and I could come back to it through reading, or bring that word up and say, hey, you mentioned this in class. Can we like go over it one more time, and making sure I have the correct definition. I think once I have the definitions in the context, then I can really go into my papers and different things later on with that type of language.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add a little bit, because you guys all already said amazing things. One thing that I'm always thinking about when I'm taking notes is, how does this build on what we already talked about? How does this add to what I already know? And like I said, I'm a visual learner. So in my notes, there are a bunch of arrows and saying 10 years later, this happened, or this relates to this in this way. And so I will kind of take kind of summary notes of what is happening in the lecture, and then go back with like colored pens and make those connections almost like a mind map.
Yeah, that is so good.
Add, it would be really cool to like see and know. I know a long time I used to try to type my notes. I don't learn anything typing. I have to handwrite. I'm very much like the whole visual. I need colors, different things like that. So integrating that and learning that type of note-taking style, I think also helps you piece together like information.
I see you coming in the chat, right?
I was about to say that. I was like, colors. Wow. Could be me. I wanted us to take a little beat here and see if any of our guests wanted to answer this question, or if you had any other questions that came up since we were chatting.
I mean, color coding is really where it's at.
You do a lot of color coding. Every day I'm impressed, Katie. Every day.
I mean, visually, it springs back in your mind. Like, the more vivid it is, the more likely you are to pay attention to that. That's my theory anyway. I have no academic research to back that up. Yeah, writing the lecture down. Yeah, that's so, Joy, it's a struggle for all of us. You'll find your way for sure. I think, the more that I like listen to different lectures, especially like in those semesters where I have a lot of classes, like I'm taking like 20, 22 credit hours, you really start to prioritize, how much you can take in. And once you kind of like find your boundaries and you push those, then I think it comes together. But I still fight that urge to write things down verbatim for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when you really like the class. Correct. 22 hours, that's nuts.
Especially with unlearning, I had to unlearn not writing everything that's on the slide. When I think this happened a lot more when we were in person, and I would say, actually, can you not go to the next slide yet? I'm still writing. And it's just like, no, like you don't need to write that because it's on the slide. Really think about what's not on the slide, what's not being said that you could highlight in your notes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know early in the workshop at the beginning, we chatted a little bit about, some of the differences between high school versus college level writing. And some of you already kind of, answered this question that I'm about to pose, but what are some of your, I guess, other favorite parts of writing now in college than in high school? And guess if you don't want to, unmute, you can definitely put that answer in the chat too. Oh, let me see what Joy said. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Yeah, that's great. Writing down what the professor says, as well as writing comments of peers. Yeah. Because sometimes I'm not engaging in the text, but then when my peer says something, I'm like, oh, I didn't think about the text in that way. And now I kind of have a new lens that I can later reference if I want to speak about that topic later in my paper. Mm-hmm. Any favorite parts of college level writing now? I know we talked a lot about free writing, more so here, more analysis, but if you want to drop any of your other favorite parts, please do.
I don't know if I don't know if there's anything specific that I like about the writing process in college, but I think that I'm just more appreciative of the fact that, yeah, it's more open, but I think that in terms of the constraints that we are forced to abide by in high school level writing, there's just so many that I feel like I haven't seen in college level writing, or at least professors at Agnes are not stressing. I won't say that it's not stressed at other institutions.
Mm-hmm.
But I know like grammar is still something that we see on rubrics with Agnes professors, but I just remember in high school, it was so many points. It was like 20 points if you didn't have I was just like, well, what about like all this lovely content that I said, all this analysis that doesn't matter anymore, but I think I'm just appreciative that, I feel like Agnes professors are definitely looking at your papers holistically, looking at, the quality that is there instead of, there are some people who ding points, but dinging points for like crazy stuff,
Mm-hmm.
minor things that have nothing to do with the quality of my work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so good, Amaris. I couldn't agree more. Go ahead, Katie, go ahead.
I just would like to, there has to be a plug at every event. We will have some more grammar workshops coming up. We have done a few grammar things in the past, but we will have another workshop coming up in the next month or so that's specifically going to focus on grammar because it is a thing. We're not going to get away from it, but just cute little plug. Y'all may resume.
No, I can agree more with Amaris. I think our professors are definitely much more focused here at Agnes with kind of content development, analysis development, because, kind of big picture thinking ideas, pushing us to be leaders of the world, if you will. But as Caitlin said, grammar is still very, very important. And that, some of the issues that we see when people come into the center kind of tend to be around grammar as well. And that's why we're hosting that workshop that's upcoming. I got the plug too, kid. Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I just, in like the last few minutes that we have, I just want to emphasize We're talking, the workshop is, entitled Building Good Habits for College Level Writing. And in order to write at your fullest and at your best, writing is a process that you have to plan for. And that's why I really enjoyed Felicia really talking through the steps of reviewing a prompt, all of the things that you have to look for. I know we have this kind of culture of procrastination that just sweeps over us like nothing I've ever seen. But even if you don't begin to work on an assignment right away, really taking the time to dissect a prompt, what it's asking you to do, and to at least think through your ideas, your preliminary ideas, and what's expected, you can plan for that. Right. Your fullest. I mean, yes, some people work really well under pressure, but you really want to give yourself all of the time to do the deep research, to develop your ideas, to draw multiple mind maps and connect ideas, to talk to the text, engage with the text, put yourself in multiple texts, right? We do a lot of reading. And it's necessary to read in order to do research projects. That's something that the librarians really emphasize every time I meet with them. Please make sure you actually read. So you want to, if you're doing a research paper that's very long, you want to build in time in the writing process to read those sources as much as you can. So correct. Like Ren said, writing under pressure is much easier when you're not also scrambling for sources under pressure. So in terms of building really good habits for writing, we're really talking about building a writing process that works for you. So when you get to the point where you have to put thoughts onto paper, you can really communicate in the clearest way possible that's most authentic to you and what you intend to convey. So that is my spiel. That is like my favorite tagline as a tutor. Writing is a process that you have to plan for. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about developing your academic voice and building good habits to take with you throughout the rest of your undergraduate career.
Yeah, absolutely, Kaylee. And I was actually just going to go ahead and reiterate our other point of the workshop, which was kind of finding your academic voice. And I think it very much echoes what you were just finishing up saying, that, reading is very essential and very important. And obviously, it's super important for us to begin developing our topic as well as finding evidence for our topic, building out our analysis. But in conjunction with that, reading is also super important and quite helpful, trying to then identify what we want to see in our own writing in terms of our own academic voice. So, don't forget, as you read as well, notice what you notice. Yes, for building your topic, but also in terms of, I don't think I really understood what this author was saying. And I'm not necessarily sure if it's because, maybe the author didn't have as much information, or if the author is just writing in this kind of clunky, not concise way, like Amaris was referencing earlier tonight, and then deciding for yourself, like, is this the kind of academic writing tone, style, technique that you want to include in your own writing, or is this something that you want to change? I have these big ideas and dreams of like shifting up the IR discipline and they might not come true, but at least in my own little writing bubble, that's how I feel about, kind of reclaiming that space and making kind of text in general just more available for all, which I think is quite exciting as well. And we are absolutely here for you if you ever need to have more conversations about how to find your own academic voice, or tips on how to read or take notes and things like that, because the center is really here to help you develop those good habits in writing.
Yes, and in speaking of that, I know it's 7:30. This is the last thing I promise. There's another slide just to detail what our services are. I know we're in this wonky like hybrid mode. But we do have two kinds of tutoring, just like we had last semester and the semester before that. Synchronous tutoring is listed on WC Online as Schedule 1, where you meet on Zoom or on whatever platform with a tutor and you get feedback in real time. The other schedule, which is on the far right of this slide, is asynchronous tutoring, where you submit your documents, you submit your prompt, and you get feedback from a tutor within, I think it's actually 24 hours now and not 48. Okay. And the final thing that we have that is super awesome and super helpful, and there's actually a handout about one of this workshop that we did today, is our CWS handouts. There's so many about public speaking, about writing, in disciplines for professional things. All of that you can find on our website at agnescott.edu/writing and speaking. It is now 7:31. Thank you all so much for coming. We appreciate you being here, and we hope that you found it helpful. Please make appointments with us if you have assignments and things that you want to work on. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.